Delight Your Marriage, episode 33.
Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Burrowes.
Hey there, it's Belah. I hope that you are doing well today. Thank you for joining me. This is a hard topic for sure. Before we dive into that, I want to mention two things. First off, you know that we are here every Tuesday and Thursday early morning, so you can plug in right away to listen in. The other thing is my next show is actually coming out Thursday, is a solo show with me, and I'm answering basically the question I get asked or the concern I get asked most from husbands. So I would love for you to listen in because I'm going to give some really clear advice. And of course, as usual, I had my husband listen to it to make sure I cleared it all with him. And in the middle of it, it was pretty funny. He called me over and grabbed me and kissed me because apparently I was right on the money. So that's Thursday, and it's going to be talking about his drive, his desire for sex in his marriage and how you can make him wildly passionate for you. So that's also the topic of the webinar coming up. That's June 9th at 8 p.m. So please go to delightyourmarriage.com/webinar. You will not want to miss this one. It is all about how he will be wild for you and figuring out those keys. Okay, let's talk about today. Today, we are diving into a very difficult topic to discuss, and it's something that unfortunately so many people are hurting from that we cannot continue ignoring it. We just cannot. In our day and age, it's affecting over 20 to 25% of the population. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people are affected by this. That means, as you'll hear today, every neighborhood, every street, every family is affected by sexual abuse. As very sad as it is, the truth is, that's the statistics. That's what's really happening. And so with a heavy heart, I seek in this podcast to give you real information and practical tools and keys to help fight against this, because the enemy works in lies. He's the father of lies, the Bible says, and he works in deceit and deception and ignorance and the darkness and isolation. And so many women are reeling from the effects of being abused, and so many men are reeling from the shame and of the effects as well of being abused or being the abuser even, that it's just a conversation that needs to be had. We need to start talking about this because it's ripping apart families before they even become families. And if you've had any kind of abuse in your past, you know what I'm talking about. Before you ever were married, if you suffered abuse, it's affecting you even now. And I believe that Dr. Nina Burrowes, actually, she's a researcher. She's an amazing background that's allowed her to speak so confidently on this topic. But I wanted to actually take the extra time. This is a longer episode than what is normal for DYM. But this conversation is just so important because this is powerful. And it's really important we understand to protect our kids, our families, our futures, and to heal from our past. And I believe God wants you to hear this message. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Delight Your Marriage listener. I am thrilled to have Dr. Nina Burrowes. Dr. Burrowes has actually been recommended to me by a good friend, actually, in the No More movement, who really focuses in on ending sexual abuse and sexual violence in relationships. And Dr. Burrowes has just got a vast experience and expertise. I'm going to let her introduce herself more thoroughly. But Dr. Burrowes, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Well, would you go ahead and introduce yourself and give us an insight about what your work is like, a little bit about your day-to-day life, if you would?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a psychologist and I'm a researcher, and I specialize in sexual abuse. And I'm relatively unusual in that I look at sexual abuse from every angle I can think of. So I started off my career doing research with abusers, with people who'd been convicted of sex offences. And then I moved on and did some work with people who were victims of sexual abuse. And I've worked with young people in terms of what kind of messages can we give to young people in terms of awareness and outreach and prevention. And most recently, I've got involved in law enforcement. So I'm spending more and more of my time working with police forces, helping them to investigate cases, and also prosecutors, helping them to use the psychology that we understand about abusers when they're prosecuting a case.
Wow, that's just fascinating. So you really do have every angle kind of research. And so when you talk about your research, what does that kind of entail?
So I'm a qualitative researcher, so most of my work is doing in-depth interviews with people, but it really depends. I mean, research for me is really about asking smart questions and then trying to find answers. And I actually work for myself. I'm a freelance consultant. And that's what's really enabled me to have this career where I've managed to explore so many different aspects of this issue, because there's not really a career path that helps you work with offenders and victims and the public and law enforcement in the way that I have. So that's been my career to date. And it was when I was working, I wrote a report for prosecutors and really focusing on juries and how can you help members of the public come into a case that is a rape case, and how can you help them overcome their ideas of what they think rape might be. And most people think like a rape is always a stranger attack and there's always violence and the victim always tries to fight and they tell the police straight away, and that's kind of what they're expecting to hear because that's kind of the story we tell in society. And of course the reality is very different, and most rapes are committed by somebody who knows the victim. Most victims do not fight. Most people never report, so there's very few people come forward. So you need to help the jury kind of go on a journey because we have a lot of myths about sexual abuse and what it is. And when you go into a courtroom, you confront reality. And so it was doing that research that really kind of was a slight change for me in terms of my work. That's when I started creating content for the public, because I could just see that, the really big thing, which is why the No More campaign is really useful, is it's awareness of sexual abuse is so important, and not just that it exists. We all know that it exists. It's in the news every day. And most people would put their hands up and say, yeah, that's a bad thing. It shouldn't happen. But actually the realities, like what does a sex offender look like? How do they behave? How would you know if there was one in your life? What is it like when someone's abused? What is the impact? Our understanding of these issues is often very inaccurate. And those inaccuracies can make life so much harder for victims and unfortunately so much easier for offenders. So it's really important that we start to have much more sophisticated conversations in society about sexual abuse.
Wow, that's so good. Well, I already have 20 questions I want to follow up with. Well, the first thing I want to just pull out from what you just shared was that you're a freelancer, which means you fund, or your business funds your own research. Is that how it works?
I'm effectively like an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Yes. Well, see, that's wonderful because you do get to then choose your own path, which is so helpful for anyone listening, because that means her funders are not telling her what to research. She's able to pick that herself.
I'm always on message because
wonderful.
There's nobody, and I have such a diverse range of clients, and my independence, to me, that I value that so much. It means I can take crazy risks with my own kind of personal finances if I choose to. Wow. But it also means I can always say the thing that's difficult to say because, I'm okay with that. And there's no boss.
Politics are not involved.
No politics.
Wonderful.
Yeah, which is essential in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. Okay, cool. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you before we dive in further, is there a quote or an encouraging thought that has meant a lot to you as you've been doing this work?
Yeah, you know what? I worked my first job was for the prison service here in England. And when I was there, my favorite phrase that I heard in a meeting one day, because there can sometimes be a lot of frustration because you're trying to do important work, but you're working within this huge bureaucracy, and of course there's politics involved. And the phrase was hit the target, miss the point. And I find that very incentivizing because often we're chasing our targets, whatever that might be in work, but we haven't sat back and really asked ourselves, have we asked the right question? Do we even know what it is that we're doing anymore? Like we're hitting this target that someone has told us is important, but we have missed the point. And in this line of work, the point is often a human being, and sometimes they can get dropped in the process. So I find that that phrase really useful in my work because it's something I'm always asking myself, and I set a target for myself.
That's just brilliant. I'm so grateful for that quote and that thought, because I think it is so easy to get mired in the details and forget what we're actually trying to accomplish. And I appreciate that you mentioned it's a person's heart and their livelihood and their future and everyone that's around them that gets affected by this. And it's just so near and dear to my heart, your work, because I have a very close personal friend and others that are not quite as close, but a very, very close one that was raped by someone she knew, and she was too scared to go to any kind of authority and any kind of, there was absolutely no retribution on this young man because it was in her social scene. And if she had done any kind of, rock the boat, all of her friends knew this person and knew her. So it's just really sad.
It is. Often stacked against the victim. I think we, in terms of criminal justice and law, I don't think people realize how stacked against the victim it is. We really asking an awful lot of people when we say, report to the police. Like that's a big ask. But we need to make it a lot easier for them because we need them. We need them much more than they need us. Like they've already been abused. The worst case scenario, they've already lived it. And we can't take that away. And in a sense, there is no justice for them. Like real justice is this didn't happen. But it did happen to them. But in order to stop it happening to you and me and our kids, we need victims to come forward to report that offender. That's the only way we get sex offenders off the streets and away from us. But the system just really doesn't help them do that at all, which is absolutely tragic.
So let's talk about that. So what are the items that are stacked against the victim? Can you kind of point them out point by point?
Well, I'm going to miss some. There are so many. Okay. We could be talking for hours,
absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think let's start on the micro level and actually themselves, because you have lots of personal barriers to reporting to the police. A lot of victims of abuse, we have ideas about sexual abuse in society. I call them rape myths, but these ideas of what a real assault is, like a real victim will fight and a real victim will scream, and a real sex offender is this monster who jumps out on you, and all of these ideas about sexual abuse which are not accurate. And so the first barrier you have when you're abused is you need to get over your own internal ideas and recognize that was abuse and you were not to blame, that it was not your fault, and that it does count, because you also are holding these myths of what sexual abuse is. So the guilt and the shame and the could I have prevented it? Could I have seen it? Oh, he's such a nice guy. I mean, he's been grooming you. He's a super nice guy superficially. But that moment when you were abused, you knew exactly what he was. So, and also because most victims don't fight, and this is because they have a perfectly natural fear response, fight or flight or freeze, and most people freeze, and that's what, that's a smart thing to do. Like they're probably physically stronger than you. You don't know at that point that you're going to survive this experience. So freezing, not fighting, trying to placate your abuser, that's a smart thing to do. And it worked, because you know what, you did survive. You were, in a sense, only raped. You were not killed. But you need to kind of get over all of that to have the courage to, even enter that police station or even tell anyone else what's happened to you. And again, just to add to all of this is most likely somebody like somebody you love and you trust. And you don't want it to be true. You don't want to look at that person and think they're an abuser, especially if they're a partner or an immediate family member. So then you've got the impact of your relationship with them. And then there's the people around them, your family, your friends, as you were saying, the social circuit and the disruption. And it can almost feel like you're the person causing the problem by reporting, when of course you're not. It's that abuser that is responsible for everything. And then, of course, we have our system, and different countries have different ways of reporting abuse. Some places have got excellent systems. They're really trying to make it as easy as possible for you. Others, not so much. And that can really vary. Depending, and often there's often like the process, but then there's the individual that you meet when you do it. There are excellent people out there. Like, I think a lot of people forget professionals who work in the area of sexual abuse, whether that's investigating it or prosecuting it or being a counselor or anything like that, they're mostly choosing to work in that space. Most of them are effectively, whilst they're paid, they're volunteering, they're choosing to work in this issue because they care about it. Yes. So there's a lot. I meet a lot of police officers. I meet a lot of prosecutors. I meet a lot of people trying to do an impossible job with not enough resources. And you can find a good one. There I can assure you, there are plenty of good ones out there.
Yeah.
But then, if you do want to report, I think one of my biggest frustrations and why I'm doing a lot of work for the public is, because even if we had like the perfect police setup, like the most beautiful reporting system and amazing prosecutors that are taking every case to court and doing an amazing job, you know what? A jury is deciding. Like it's members of the public that are actually deciding the outcome. And this is why society's attitudes might be the biggest barrier to justice that you face, because we don't want to believe your story. We actually like the idea that all sex offenders look and behave like monsters. That we can spot them. That the moments that we're at risk, that's when it's dark and we're outside, and we should watch out for strangers. Then we should probably get a cab home, or we should watch out for the strange guy in the playground because he's the risk. And whilst those images of those people, they're kind of frightening images, they're actually very reassuring because they are strangers. They are far away from us. They're far away from our families. We can spot them easily. We don't want to believe that nice young man who's the defendant, he's got a loving family and a girlfriend and all these things, is capable of what you're telling us he did to you. And that can be a huge thing for when you've got your own doubts as well because of what you've been through and you're traumatized and all the rest of it. That can be a huge barrier.
Now, I want to just focus in on a couple of things that you mentioned. So first, we'll just, since you mentioned, of course, the system is immense. There's so many factors we could focus on, but you focus so far on three things. One is the victim mentality themselves, on really wondering why they didn't fight. Why didn't they run away? Thinking that maybe they led the person on. Maybe it was their fault. So that was a huge piece, and I appreciate that, bringing that out. The other piece that you mentioned was the actual system, actually coming to the police and though there are good ones that really want to help the victims, there are also a lot of barriers to finding the good ones, and there's also some bad ones, and having some scary people to be like, well, what were you wearing, and those kinds of things. And then the third piece that you brought up is then just society's perspective in general, because ultimately the jury is the one that decides. So very, very good. Now, I want to just focus in on, why is it that we want to think of these sex offenders as monsters?
Because none of our friends or family look like monsters. I think the monster is far away. I mean, they're, and I think we want to see abuse in this kind of unexplainable monster way, because it's far, far away from our worlds. So we want to, in a way, we want them to be people that we couldn't possibly understand. Rather than, somebody's son, someone's brother, someone's colleague.
Someone's father.
Someone who's actually, on some occasions, in some ways, a nice guy, like capable of doing good things, but also capable of doing horrible things. That's a scary image for us to hold, both of those in both hands.
Yes, that's exactly right. And Now, when you have gone into those prisons and gone and talked to these offenders, I mean, what have you kind of gleaned from who these people really are and how they got into a place where they could be such abusers?
So the interesting thing of when you go into a prison, when you're on the wing that holds the sex offenders, because it's different to the other wings. The other wings are noisy and kind of exclusively full of young men. And you go onto the wing that houses the sex offenders, and it doesn't tend to be as noisy, but also suddenly every sector of society is there. Like the age range is massive. You're going to probably, if I'm interviewing people, I'm going to be interviewing people with PhDs, people who are doctors, people who are unemployed, like every kind of, income level, because whereas other people are committing offenses, to feed a drug habit or because of a lack of income, these kind of issues, economic issues, or education issues or opportunity issues. Sexual offending isn't about that. Your income does not reduce your risk. Your place in society doesn't reduce your risk. So you're going to meet professionals and people who've worked in charity. You're going to meet everybody. All of society is represented.
Oh my goodness.
And so that's kind of the first thing that hits you, because it actually, in a way, it kind of feels so normal, because everybody's there. And so I guess the first thing to really emphasize is you cannot spot these people by looking at them, and you can't rule them out because you are in this religious group or this ethnic group or this kind of income bracket, or because you're all professionals here. There is no thing that you could tell me about a person and I would say, they're definitely not a sex offender, because there's just nothing. There's no way to. Really?
No way.
No, I mean, I cannot. I mean, I personally could not spot a sex offender. I couldn't tell you what it is that I would be looking for. I would look at someone and say, oh no, there's no way that they are a sex offender, because mean, these are invariably charming. I mean, many sex offenders, they need to be charming in order to commit their offense, often.
Oh, my goodness.
So they can come across as very nice, caring, charming people. Wow. So I think that's the scary truth.
Well, Dr. Burrowes, this is just, hard to even imagine for anyone listening to think that, we do have this monster mentality of they have a certain profile in our minds. And so for Dr. Nina to say she studies these people, she speaks to them daily, one-on-one, interviews them in depth, and then she cannot say there is a certain trait that says they're safe. Nothing along those lines. And now here's just a quick follow-up to that. Female or male, or vast majority male?
Massively reduce the risk if someone's female, but not eliminate the risk.
Not eliminate. Okay.
So it depends on your data, but 6-8% of sex offenders roughly are female. So if someone's a woman, that does not rule it out at all.
It doesn't rule it out, but
no.
Okay. So then now when you talk to the sex offenders one-on-one, from your data, can you determine how these offenses are usually, what are the most common ways that these are happening, the rapes?
It really depends. There are lots of different types of sex offenders, and they offend for different reasons. As some people exclusively offend against children, and a lot of that will be because they're pedophiles. So they're having sexual desire that is maybe exclusively or not exclusively towards children, and they're feeding that desire. So that will be maybe their primary motivation.
Okay. Can I ask you about that actually, before you go on? So I did some research a while back, but it was talking about how someone who does child pornography, uses child pornography, the research was something like the vast majority, 6 to 8 months after beginning that addiction, then they begin to abuse actual children. Is that something that's come up in your research at all?
I think one way of understanding this behavior is to compare it to something like drink or drugs. So there's a pathway. So a very large number of people may try smoking dope at some point in their life, and most of those people, they don't actually go on to the next step. They try it, it's not for them, or they like that and they stick with that, they don't move on. Some people will go on to the next stage, so they're taking harder and harder drugs, and then a minority will end up, shooting heroin. But there's a pathway. Most people don't shoot heroin on day one. Most people start in that early kind of dope area and then go through looking for a bigger hit every time. And sexual offending can be the same. So you can start with something, if you like, lower levels. So, a lot of people starting with fantasy, which isn't, obviously isn't an offense because it's just pure fantasy. And a lot of people, they don't go any further. They have no desire to act on it. They just fantasize either about abuse or they fantasize about children or something like that. But do not go any further. In which case, then, that's fine. No offense caused. If it doesn't affect them, then that's okay. But other people feel the need to act on that, and so maybe pornography. And as you say, then maybe they need to get a bigger fix. And so if the internet stuff isn't working for you, then you need to do something more extreme. And it can carry on because in the same way, you need a bigger hit to get what you need from this thing, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I appreciate the mention of a pathway because obviously I mentioned that, this is really a Christian faith-based podcast that's really focused towards wives. And I mean, that's kind of, to our listeners, that's really the start is in the mind where we let our mind wander away and we've got to take those thoughts captive. So I appreciate that beginnings in the mind. Now you were talking about, so I interjected, but you were talking about some other really common abuses. So you were talking about the children abuse, and then what were the next things you were going to mention?
Yeah, so then you have other people who are mostly offending against adults. And there can be different reasons. I think for me, the key thing is understanding that any behavior to me has a function. There's a purpose to it. Like somebody self-harming might look crazy to us. Like, what are you doing? How can that possibly help you? But for actually the person who's doing it, there is a function for them. Like it's an outlet. It's a way of feeling alive. It's the only way I know to express my pain. Like whatever it is, there is a purpose behind it. And so the same for sex offenders. There's going to be a purpose, and it's about understanding. Okay, so what could that purpose be? For some people, their offending is part of a coping mechanism that they've developed. So if they're feeling slightly powerless, slightly impotent, if they're feeling out of control, they have learnt either to use sex as a way of regaining a sense of potency and control, or they've specifically learnt to use sexual abuse as doing that. So when they're abusing, that's their way of feeling powerful because they're able to do this to somebody else.
Wow. That's just so, it's so insightful because it, in terms of thinking through, getting that sense of these people aren't monsters. I mean, all of us want to respond negatively when we feel powerless, where we feel like we don't have control over our own lives. We want to respond in a way that gets that control back. My own life, I was bulimic for years, and that was a way of control because I felt so out of control. But this was something I had control over. So that's very interesting you mentioned that. So is that part of your research is when you talk to sex offenders, that's a trend that comes up, is this I needed something to get control again. Is that?
Someone may not always have the insight to recognize that that's been there, what's happened on that evening, but then maybe they tell you the story of that evening. I don't know, maybe something's happened. There's normally, something like that, there's often a trigger. So maybe you made redundant or, maybe you were rejected by 4 women that night and you took how you felt out on the 5th. Make yourself feel like a real man again. So that kind of thing. But it doesn't always make sense in such an obvious way as that. But that's an example. And for others, it really, the sense of power and control is less of a coping mechanism, but more of the sense of their entitlement. They have a very warped idea of themselves and their place in the world and what they are entitled to.
Wow.
And so their offending can be about expressing this, about enjoying. Again, so still about power and control, but less about coping because I feel disempowered this evening, and much more about I am just, this entitled, I'm just this powerful, this is what I can do.
Wow.
I think the really important thing to recognize is the healthy, loving person. They don't sexually abuse because sexual abuse offers them absolutely nothing. Like, they recognize that real power does not come from abusing somebody else. They recognize that real love and real intimacy has got absolutely nothing to do with control. And everything to do with the other person choosing you. It's as much. It's about your vulnerability. You should be taking your vulnerability into the space, not making the other person feel vulnerable. And so it is the broken person that abuses. And so it's about understanding, okay, so how are you broken, and how is the abuse in your mind helping you fix this thing? Unfortunately, of course, whatever it is, whatever your story is, your sexual abuse does not fix it, because you cannot fix yourself by breaking someone else. That just is not how it works, which unfortunately is why it's a repeat offense, because it doesn't work.
Yes.
And, if it worked, you would do it once and you would never have to do it again. It does not work. Hence the repeat of offending.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. So there's so many things that you just pointed out. Okay. So one, the healthy person does not abuse because love has nothing to do with control. You cannot take someone's freedom and expect true love. That's exactly the opposite of love. You cannot take that freedom. That's brilliant. The other thing I wanted to ask you, bring out also, is that desire to abuse is coming from some kind of brokenness, some kind of pain in their life, in their past. That, I mean, maybe, and I know that, abuse often is generational. The parents were abused and then they abused their kids, or, the uncle was abused, whatever. That's how you would kind of relate those, that they had loss of power and then they felt like that was the way to regain it, was to take someone else. Is that how the thought is?
It's not always about previous experience of abuse, though. So we know. So if you talk to abusers, and let's face it, the abusers I get to speak to, they've all been caught. They're all in prison.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so self-report of abuse by abusers is a lot higher than you'd expect if you're just talking to members of the public. So they're much more likely to report that they've been abused than someone you met on the street. And there's lots of reasons why this might happen. One reason, of course, is that it's true that they were abused. That does, of course, happen. Another is that they're lying and they're looking for sympathy, and they're looking to actually, have their behavior make sense in a way that's slightly socially acceptable. So they say that they were abused. Wow. But the other reason perhaps is also that if your abuse stems from this awful experience of abuse when you were a child, so you've had this your whole life, it's possible that by the time you become an adult, you're committing the kind of sex offences that do come to the attention of law enforcement. So in a sense, we are over. These people are more likely perhaps to get caught because of the root of their abuse. But if we flip the issue around, if you are a victim of abuse, it's kind of controversial. Like, are you much more likely to become an abuser? And the best data I've seen is no. There's a subgroup that is slightly elevated risk, but most people who are sexually abused do not go on to become abusers. In fact, you could totally argue that you've had this awful experience, like you know what it is like. You're even less likely to do that to anyone else because you know what this awful thing is like. So it is correct that many sex offenders report that they've been abused, but it is incorrect to assume that someone who's been abused is therefore at a much, much more elevated risk of becoming an abuser themselves. The data I've seen, and it's good data, is only 1% of those people go on to become small.
Okay, thank you so much for bringing that to light. So just in sum, basically the point is that yes, it's true that a lot of sexual abusers were in fact abused.
Or report they were abused, yeah.
Or report that they were abused, but it does not mean that someone who was sexually abused is then more likely to abuse. That is not the case.
It's not the case. Oh, the numbers also don't work out. Unfortunately, most abusers abuse many, many people. So the simple maths wouldn't work out. If everybody who was abused became an abuser, there would be nobody left on the planet who'd never had this experience. So yeah, it's absolutely not the case that victims are, super at risk from becoming abusers themselves.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you so much for clearing that up, because I can imagine people probably have that concern in their own head.
I think so, especially if you were a male. If you were abused as a boy or as an adult, I think you can have huge concerns. One, about your sexual orientation, and two, that you are yourself going to come on to become an abuser. That could be a massive risk to seeking, a massive barrier to seeking the help that you need and deserve.
Wow. Yes. Okay. So I do want to follow up with both of those. So one is sexual orientation. How does that abuse then affect how they move forward with their sexual orientation?
I mean, everybody, of course, is different, but I think a lot of men, especially if they were raped or sexually assaulted as an adult, they can wonder, did the perpetrator think I was gay? Like, because they're thinking, well, this is a gay crime, surely, and it's not. This is very, very often heterosexual men raping heterosexual men. It's not a crime that is exclusively in the gay community at all. But this is what the victim can think. Is it because they thought I was gay? And then, just like every other victim of sexual abuse, men are also unlikely to physically respond in terms of fight the abuser or shout for help. They're also likely to freeze. And so then they can question, well, I should have punched him, I should have fought. Like, am I a real man? And did I therefore in some way want this? And so there's all of that to go over. And then just, to make matters a lot harder, it's not uncommon for both males and females who experience sexual abuse to have a physiological sexual reaction during the abuse. Right. So women can get wet and they can even climax, and men can get an erection. And so if you are a male and you've experienced sexual abuse, the added confusion can be that your body did respond to the abuse. And so did you on some level want this to happen to you? And the answer is absolutely no. You're absolutely not in control of those physiological responses. Like, it's just pure biology.
That's right.
And so it doesn't say anything about whether you wanted it. And yourself, if when you were there in that moment, I'm sure the overriding feeling was terror, like absolute fear. There's no way. I mean, the whole point of abuse is you did not consent. You didn't want this. But it can be very confusing afterwards for everybody. But that is, if you like, an additional confusion for many men, because they can really wonder whether this means that they're gay, and it absolutely does not.
That's exactly. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Absolutely. And I think, something I'm incredibly passionate about is giving more understanding and insight about how the male physiology works, because there's 4 different reasons for erections, and some is simply, it's called a reflex erection, where it's simply the touch. It creates a reflex. And so I think I just appreciate you bringing that out, because I think that's a big reason men, even growing up, that have had either abuse or just, embarrassing experiences in the locker room with just males present. I mean, it can be so incredibly confusing. So also very important for mothers to recognize and understand that, little boys, it's a very natural response, because the flaccid penis does not have blood flowing through it like every other part of our body. But when these certain different kinds of erections, sometimes they're even random, just erections so that the blood can go in and clean things out the way that it has to do in every other part of our body, it's necessary for an erection to happen. So I just appreciate that you bringing that out, that this can be incredibly, incredibly confusing. Absolutely. So I do want to ask you about the other question that kind of, just to circle back a little bit to how people can get help that's safe and that they know, there's good ways to understand themselves and in this, safe place, the way we're talking about it, very victim oriented, very understanding of, abuse, not saying, well, what did you do wrong? How can they start to get resources like that?
My first port of call would be the internet. These days, the kind of specialist advice is just a kind of a search engine away. And there are loads of charities, organizations in every country. And the beauty of the internet, you don't have to go to the one in your own country, and they should point you in the right direction. I think, one of the things I noticed, though, a few years ago that often like a news piece will cover abuse or something like that, and there's if you're affected by this story, like phone this helpline, and it's great, the helplines are there, but actually for a lot of people, accessing support can be a huge step, because to ask for help, asking for help is hard for most of us anyway. Like most of us don't even want to ask someone to open a door for us, it can feel like a lot. Asking for help means that you need help. It means that this thing really did happen and it's affected you and it's real and actually you're not coping. And so it can be, and you also need to say, well, and I deserve help. And this can be a huge ask for a lot of people. So last year I actually published my first book, which was exactly written for this audience. I say written, it's actually an illustrated book. It's a drawn book. And that book is available online. You can read the whole thing for free. And it just explains what happened to your brain, most likely, when you abused, and why perhaps it's still affecting you all these years later, why you didn't fight, why you're not crazy, and also why you're not alone. So please also, look for that on the internet. 'Cause hopefully, I think when you can understand yourself and realize you're not completely crazy, that can actually give you the courage you need to then seek help. But sometimes you need something before you ask for help.
Yes, that's really good. Well, I'll have that information linked up at delightyourmarriage.com. So I'll have all of Dr. Burrowes' information and this book specifically all linked up there. So I want to kind of go back to something else that you mentioned, being that the vast majority of abusers are men. I'm interested, have you come up with some insights about men that you think would be helpful for us to understand? Why is it vast majority is men?
It's true, yeah. There are lots of different reasons. I'm working on a new book at the moment, and it is about why do abusers abuse? So this is an issue that's I'm kind of grappling with right now.
Yep.
And there, on the superficial level, I guess our legal system is geared towards male perpetrators. So as a woman in England, I can't be convicted of rape because in our law you need to have a penis in order to be convicted of rape. You need to use a penis.
Wow.
But of course, we know from other data sources, from talking to victims, that still, regardless of the laws, the majority of perpetrators are male.
That's right.
If we start to think about, what is the function of abuse for you? How does it help you? Well, if the answer is it helps me feel powerful and potent, then sex is a way. We call it impotence for a reason, and sex is a way for men to feel potent, and perhaps it doesn't perform that function for women in quite the same way. I think it still makes you feel a sense of power as a woman, but less so. I think for men it's a straighter, shorter line between their sexual potency and their ability to sexually penetrate someone else, and their sense of power and effectiveness and agency and all of these things. So I think abuse therefore is able to give males that which perhaps to women it would give you a sense of power, but I think it would be in a different way. I think women can get that sense of power in other ways. We're able to do it in other ways. Often we have complete power over the children in our lives. And so if you want to feel powerful, then we get that power from there. We are often completely in control of that. So we get we're absolutely, that baby is completely dependent on us. And so we kind of get that from other sources. I think, so the sexual component of sexual offending, I think, gives men something that it does not provide to women.
Yeah.
And then you add in the society's ideas, attitudes to women, these kinds of things. That the man who's very promiscuous is a stud. Well, it's not a huge leap from being a stud to being a rapist if you've got a mixed up idea of what consent is. So so you've then got these kind of social attitudes too, which play into it.
Yep.
But read the book when it's done.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. when you got this fully thought through. That's great. That's awesome. Well, I would also want to just posit something that I read recently in one of my sex books. I can't even remember which one it was, but it was a Christian, themed book, but one thing it talked about is a man is most vulnerable when he asks for sex. And because that's kind of his, that's his heart on his sleeve right there. Whereas, a woman is much more vulnerable when she's maybe, I would say, like asking to be cherished or asking to be given, value or worth in those kinds of affection ways. So I'm interested in that kind of area of like, a man then hates feeling vulnerable, hates it.
Yeah, I think sex is terrifying for many men. I don't think we talk about it. They're absolutely putting themselves up to fail in terms of performance and be rejected. I mean, how vulnerable do you feel now? And now you're supposed to get an erection. I don't know how that's supposed to work. So, I think a lot of men have fear and intimidation of women, fear around their performance, and anxieties around their own potency. And so, it's not I think I could kind of see a pathway where you could, if you like, have very negative sexual experiences, because of these. I mean, navigating that space takes work. Like, you have to kind of be able to look at yourself and be insightful. You have to be able to communicate to your partner, all of this work, which is beautiful work, which is how you get to have a proper, loving, healthy, intimate relationship. But it's hard. And if you're not up to the task, a route to sex in the future can be bypassing all of that rejection business and going to abuse.
That's right. Yep.
You're not going to reject me because your choice, the whole point of rape is, the very definition is you are not consenting to this. If you're consenting, this isn't abuse. This is now sex. Is the very fact that you can't reject me because that's, I'm not giving you the option to.
Right. There's no option for me to feel rejection, emotional vulnerability.
Taken rejection out of the window. Yeah. But what you haven't done is taken impotency out of the window. So it's very hard to get good data on this, but it's not uncommon for a perpetrator of sexual abuse to fail to get an erection. So the link between potency and abusing, there's a definite link there. Between, that it's just like power, that the really strong person doesn't need to go around hitting people. They don't need to, they're so self-assured in their power. They don't need to use it to prove it to themselves or anyone else. And so the person who's going around having to tell everybody how potent they are and all the rest of it, they're a false promise, because probably the truth is they're pretty not potent.
Interesting.
So
very interesting. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. It's having to kind of give an excuse constantly for this insecurity that they feel.
Yes. Yeah,
yeah. Absolutely. Wow. That's so true. Wow. Well, so another question I wanted to ask now. Because you have worked so often with victims, and since we're speaking directly to wives, and now is the data? This is what I'm familiar with. I'd love for you to update me, but is it 1 in 4 women are sexually abused in their lifetime?
It really depends which data you get from and what your definition of abuse is, and all the rest of it. So certainly 20% of girls under 18 have experienced some kind of sexual abuse.
My goodness.
And then, this is before the this before they're an adult. So then you got rape and all the rest of it to come in. So I think the 1 in 5 is safe, if not, depending on your definition, if not an underestimate.
Wow.
And figures are much bigger for men than people realize. It's 8% of boys under 18. And then certainly the data in the UK, which I'm more familiar with, is about 10% of rapes are male victims. And this is a large number of men experiencing rape. It's a significant group too.
Wow. And now are these... the data that you've just shared, is that reported, or it's estimated even those that are unreported?
It's estimates based on reports. Okay. So, yeah.
So, which means that there could be vastly more that are unreported, or
normally, especially for men, because in terms of the theory, because we would normally say around 15 to 10% of rapes are actually reported. So you take your reported number, and you've only got 10 or 15%. Now, I would say in the case of adult men who are raped, I reckon it's even more underreported. So when we take that figure and think we've got 10%, I think actually maybe we've got a much smaller sample size of what the real figure is, because I think men are even more reluctant to report.
Absolutely.
But I mean, women are too, like 10, 15%. I mean, the message is the vast majority of people never report.
That's right. That's right. Well, and you see it in the media all the time, where when, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 women are accusing, the very recent, unfortunate thing, 25 women are accusing this celebrity of rape, and over and over and over again, we got the message of, well, these ladies are just trying to get money. They're just trying to get money. They're just making this all up.
Yeah. I don't want it to be true.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is crazy.
Well, and it's so sad, because that message is then to everyone else, if you've been raped, it's your fault, or you have an ulterior motive for coming out about it, which is horrible. I mean, completely untrue. And the other thing is, thinking about truly, this is a wife, this is a mother, this is, a woman in society. She does not want to be known for a rape that happened. That's absolutely
to go public is a massive choice. Then this is a really hard thing that someone's doing. The message that really scares me, though, is what message do sex offenders get? Carry on as you are, because 20 people can accuse you publicly, and people still don't want to believe it's true, because you don't fit the image of what they want to believe a sex offender is.
Oh my God.
If you were some, kind of creepy looking guy,
right,
that we've never heard of, we don't need 20 people probably to convince us. It's because whoever you are, we don't want to believe that someone like you could be a sex offender, because maybe you look a bit like me, or maybe you look a bit like my friends or my family, too close to home. So it's like fingers in your ears, don't want to hear it, don't want it to be true. It's very tragic.
It's very tragic, and it's so common. 1 in 4, 1 in 5. Those are very conservative numbers.
It is. It's in. I think you'd be safe to say it's in every family to some degree, every street, definitely every school. There are people everywhere. And when you're someone like me and you're kind of publicly speaking about this issue, you kind of. I have a lot of people tell me that in my personal life that they've been abused, because I guess they see me as a safe person to tell. And you can get this idea sometimes when you start working in this space, oh my God, it's everywhere. And you can think you've overreacted. And then over time you're like, no, it really is. It's everywhere. It is. Wow. It is everywhere. It's like the biggest problem we're not having sensible conversations about.
Yes.
We're talking about it and we're shouting about it.
Right.
But we're not getting to the stage where we have a sophisticated understanding of the problem, and that is the problem. It's the fact that we want to put our fingers in their ears and say, well, whose job is it to sort this thing out? They better get on it. And it's like, no, it's everybody's job. Educate yourself.
Wow. Oh my gosh, Dr. Burrowes, that's incredible. That's absolutely the case. Okay, so let's dive into these sensible conversations. I've got 3 little questions that, first of all, how does a mother talk to her kids about sexual abuse?
So I do an online video channel where I answer people's questions about sexual abuse. So they can ask me anything, and I will video them and answer. And the most frequent question I get asked is, what do we tell our kids?
Yes.
And I've been asked this question so much, I've made a little book as an answer, because it's like so important. This is super important.
Yes.
And the answer is hard. Like, I wish I had easy answers, hey?
Yes.
Because I would love to say, you know what, there's this 5-point plan, and if you follow it, your kid's totally safe. And because it doesn't work like that. If it was easy, we would be talking about these things. It's the fact that the truth is quite scary that it is making these conversations difficult. But it's just like most risks that your children face. There is no way to eliminate the risk. In the same way that you cannot eliminate the risk of illness, you cannot eliminate the risk of abuse. But you can, I think the one thing you can do to most protect your children is actually open your own eyes to the realities of abuse. Because I cannot tell you, and it breaks my heart every time, how many times people have told me I was abused as a kid, and I told my mum, and she didn't believe me. It's like she didn't want to believe you. She couldn't do the work that required her to open her eyes to reality. It's so easy to dismiss a child, and it's so understandable that you don't want it to be true.
Right.
And you can have that sense of guilt as well, like, why didn't I protect my children?
Right.
But I mean, listening and believing children when they tell you something is so important. And that's going to be easier to do if you actually know what the real risks are and you understand a bit more about abuse. So educating yourself to the realities and understanding that I'm not saying that monsters don't exist. There are some people out there who are truly monstrous. But that isn't going to be the primary danger for you to be alert to in terms of your children. It's going to be, the charming person in your life, whether that's potentially a family member or a friend or just a professional who's in your child's life, a teacher, a doctor, whatever. So part of it is that. It's about opening your eyes to the realities. And the other is the conversations you have with your kids. I think the most, it's like the biggest message we say to children about abuse is we talked about strangers and how dangerous they are, and you shouldn't go off, don't take sweets from strangers. And I think actually if we can see what we're doing there, we're placing the responsibility on our children to avoid abusers. We're trying to tell them that they can avoid their own abuse, which is so unfair and unrealistic as well, because they're much more likely to be abused by somebody who isn't a stranger. Which means that if they are abused, it's going to be very confusing for that child, because mummy and daddy have always told me to watch out for strangers. And I wasn't. So what is this? Is this thing that I've experienced from this friend of theirs, from this person that they love? Is this abuse? I don't think it can be, because this isn't the thing that we've talked about.
Wow.
So we need to have different conversations with our kids. I think educating them about strangers is an okay idea, but just don't do that and think you've covered the risks of sexual abuse, because you absolutely have not. I think but you also don't want to frighten your kids, and you also need to remember that your children are children now, but you're raising an adult, not a child. And so we want to raise children that can grow up to become adults who are comfortable about their sexuality and who aren't terrified of everybody else in the world, because kind of banged in the risks of other people to them. So we need to be raising confident kids who know their own bodies, who are confident around their own bodies, and who know that other people should respect their choices around their own bodies. Right. So if I say to you, don't touch me in that way, you should listen. And if you don't, then you're the one that's wrong, not me. That I've got that kind of understanding that this is my body, and that means I get to make certain choices. And a key component of my choices is who touches me where. And you can teach small children, to wash themselves so that they don't need help. It's simple stuff like that can making them independent around their own bodies, but also giving them a sense of pride and ownership. And you can also teach very young children that, the parts of their body that are covered by their underpants, that they're special, and that actually you don't play games with other people that involve touching those bits. Games only involve other bits of the body. And I think that's a way of helping children learn what's kind of safe and not safe, or right and wrong, in a way that's not frightening and really easy for them to understand.
Yes.
And as they grow older, like, kids are curious. So answer their questions. Lots of people talk about children going online and finding these awful sites and seeing a lot of pornography on the internet.
Yeah.
If they got decent answers from you every time, if they could talk to you about sex, and if not you, if you don't think you're the right person because you're a parent, and an adult that you trust, an adult that's in their life, like something other than an anonymous website, and you don't know what the website is, and you don't even know that they're on it. Like, if you can help them get access, if you can teach them about their bodies and make sure that they're getting access to the kind of information that you would want them to learn about their bodies, and as they get older, about sex, then they're not going to be left to their own devices. I think it's when you leave a void, when you don't say anything, that's when people are going to be going off to perhaps sources that you would rather they weren't using.
Yes. Yep.
And the final thing we can do with our children is make sure that they can talk to us. And I think most parents think that they would be able to tell if their child was being sexually abused. And I'm saying that I would not be able to tell if a child might be being sexually abused. Not for sure. I would never, ever assume that. It's too important to leave that down to an assumption. So I would always live with the idea that I'm not going to assume, I could tell. And that protects that child even more, because I'm not blinded by my own assumption. And I'm also not going to assume that they would tell me, because that is asking a lot. But I can do the best I can in terms of that. And that's about making sure that we have lots of conversations, not just about that. I think if the first time your child needs to have that type of conversation with you is to tell you that they've been abused, like that conversation is going to be very difficult to have. Wow. Whereas alternatively, if they've always been able to talk to you about stuff like that, they were able to tell you about the thing that happened at school and the thing they're scared about or afraid of, or their vulnerabilities, then this is just going to be, a big conversation, but not like the first conversation of this nature. So it's important that you can communicate in that way. And the best way to do that is to model it, to talk to children and to show them that it's okay to talk about your vulnerabilities, that as a family, these are the things you do. You share the things you're afraid of or worried about or that upset you. You apologize when you get angry. Like, you're modeling to them what you hope them to become, which is an adult who is able to talk about how they're feeling to the people that they love. And that's one of the best protective things you can do for your kids, definitely. And they're much more likely to tell you if you have that kind of relationship. But that kind of relationship, just like any relationship, just like intimacy with a partner, it takes work, and it takes you. You have to work. You have to bring to that relationship your vulnerability too, because you know what? You may be a parent, but probably don't feel like you're getting it right all the time and that you've got the answers to everything. And
that's right.
Sometimes it's about sharing that stuff.
Now, do you have an age limit of when these conversations can start? Do you have a guide for that kind of online? Because I'll link that up as well. In
the book, I've got the kinds of things you would say at different ages. But, perfect. I mean, children, they tend to get body curious first. And there does tend to be a pattern, but lots of kids can vary. But I think it's a case of sometimes people wait for the right time to have these conversations. Like, there's going to be a moment. Often you'll find that your child's going to bring that to you. And you know what? It might be in the supermarket that they ask you, Mum, what's a vagina? You know what?
Oh, yeah, good.
That's the right moment right there. Your child has chosen it for you. So, if you don't answer that question, and you answer every question in the supermarket, why can't you answer this question? It's like, actually, no, this is something we can talk about. And we're going to talk about it here if this is where you've chosen. So I think it's about, don't think the right moment's going to come along. Assume that if you don't bring it up, your child will. And I would just go with it wherever it is and make it something that's okay to talk about, because it is.
Wow, that's brilliant. And I wonder how many, that's modeling appropriate parenting to the rest of the supermarket, whoever's around to hear it.
Absolutely.
So that's,
yeah. Rather than, that's embarrassing and you can't ask you that. You have just taught your child that the word vagina is a bad word. That's the one thing, you've just taught them that really well. And so you're already on a back foot.
That's right. Wow, that's brilliant. And the other thing I like to use the analogy of, if you think of like a chalkboard, when you write a word on the chalkboard, it's a lot easier to write when it's blank, when it's free of any other junk, instead of having to write over the images and the messages that your child has already received. If you're the first one to give them a proper framing of what sex should be about and how to appropriately value your own body, that's so much better than someone else devaluing it, or the images they get from school, or I can remember first sex jokes in, second grade probably, at the latest, that's pretty clear in my mind, those sex jokes. So Yep, that's good. Okay, so I want to ask, my two kind of follow up to that is the woman that is in a marriage, and she knows that abuse in her childhood is still affecting her, and she hasn't really done any work to kind of get over or get healed or get any kind of, she knows it's affecting her sex life with her husband. What could you kind of give her in terms of maybe some processes she needs to think through, or some helpful guides to kind of move into a better space around sexuality?
Yeah, there's so many people. You've just described their reality.
Yes.
A huge group, and of course, like loads of variants across that. If you're really struggling, and you're struggling in many areas of your life, then actually I would probably prioritize getting the kind of therapeutic support you need. If you don't feel ready for that, then maybe check out my book. Maybe talk to whoever it is you feel that you can talk to. But I guess my main message to you, if that's you, is you're not alone. It's not at all unusual. Like all the things that you may be feeling that it was your fault, that you're now letting your husband down, that you're so lucky to have him and he's going to leave you if you tell him the truth, and all the rest of it is so normal. But it's about accessing the support that you need. I don't think it would be possible if you're struggling and you've had no support network, you've never really talked to anyone about this, maybe you've never met anyone else who's been sexually abused and just had that kind of, it happened to you kind of conversation too, like, do you worry about this and all the rest of it. I don't think you can get over the sex problems that you're having without doing the therapy stuff. Like it's just, the two are so entwined. And I would say probably prioritize the therapeutic progress. Because I think you'll be asking too much of yourself to suddenly feel okay with intimacy. Because you know what? You're probably not okay with intimacy because you had this experience. You can draw a direct line from your experience of abuse to how you're feeling about intimacy now. But later on, and I think this is one of the reasons why I think it's really important we talk about sex, sexuality, intimacy after sexual abuse is that often people do the therapeutic work, but they don't then do this other piece of work. It's like they're so happy to, in a sense, be able to go back to work or have their family life again, or they're kind of coping and feeling good. And often, because the services that support survivors of abuse are often so cash strapped, they don't really have always the resource to now give you, let me give you 6 months more therapy, but we're going to talk about intimacy and sex with your husband. Not always possible, because there is a waiting list and there are other people who are deeply traumatized that we need to go and help now. So that piece of work can get dropped, and that's tragic in my point of view. Like intimacy is so important for you as an individual, but for your relationship, for your partner, for everything. That's where you're expressing your aliveness with your partner. So it's really important that you don't give up.
Yes.
And that you do work at it. And how you go about that, it really, where you start, I would say whatever you feel comfortable with, because everybody has different comfort levels. Some people phoning a helpline would seem like a huge ask, whereas other people actually know I'm ready to talk to my partner about this because he or she is the person that I want to support me through this, or so I can't, whatever feels right. And if nothing feels right, then search online, find other people. There's loads of chat rooms see what other people have done, and then see if any of those options feel right for you. But do not just drop it, because you've already lost so much because of your abuse. Don't lose this too. Like you deserve to have this back in your life. And
that's right.
You know what? It might take a different form to what you're thinking. I think we sometimes have an idea, quite a rigid, closed idea of what successful sexuality is.
Right.
And we can feel like a failure if we don't hit that mark. You know what? Maybe the full expression of your sexuality now isn't going to be that conventional thing, but you'll find whatever your thing is, you'll find that. But you need to go on it's a process. It's work. You're going to have to work.
Good.
You're going to have to make yourself feel vulnerable again, and that can be really hard when you've experienced abuse. But that's the work of becoming you again. And it's worth it.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Burrowes. And I think the two elements that you pulled out really was that therapeutic process, that support, that talking it through with either a therapist, a counselor, or, a very trusted friend. And of course, being that this is the DYM podcast, I would encourage having it a spiritually mature friend, someone that can hold you in the way God sees you and the way God sees your body and the way that he loves you and wants you to be totally healed and totally just a full person again. And I love that you also mentioned that second piece of getting that comfort in sexuality again, and not again, or maybe you've never had it, right?
Yeah.
But that's really the piece that I also really, really focus in on. And so if you haven't yet come to a webinar, I do these live webinars just about once a month, where it's totally anonymous, totally free, just you and I talking about what God thinks about your sexuality and how to get through some of these reservations that have been built up in your mind that you're dirty or you're wrong, or this act is dirty or wrong or bad, or this abuse that you've suffered. It's just coats everything, the way you perceive what intimacy is supposed to be in your marriage. And maybe your husband, you think that he's then being an additional abuser in a inappropriate way. And anyway, so I would love to have you. I'd love to have you because I want to work on that second piece of how can we become fully sexual beings the way God intended from the beginning, that he made them male and female. For this reason, Jesus said, they become one flesh. So very, very appropriate to dive into that process. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Burrowes. I wanted then, we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon, but I wanted to ask you, a husband that might suspect his wife has suffered abuse or knows that she suffered abuse, what are ways that he can support her?
That can be difficult. I guess it depends whether or not you're talking about it together, or whether it's this thing that is kind of known but not talked about, or has gone unsaid. If it is an assumption, well, I mean, you have to hold the fact that it is an assumption. You could be wrong. I mean, maybe you're picking up on something, but it isn't that. It's just something else. So I guess, I mean, I would always want to be in the kind of relationship where you could have that conversation. That's going to be a really hard conversation to have. I wouldn't go with, have you been abused? I would go with, look, I would make it about you. But look, I just feel that there's this thing between us, and there's some thing that maybe I want to help you in a way, but it's almost like I'm not sure what it is that I want to help you with. But I just, I would be really honest about how vulnerable you feel about asking and how you feel. And to own it, and not say, I'm going to assume this about you, so tell me, because that's just quite confrontational.
Good. Yes.
So make yourself vulnerable, and see what happens. But not everybody is able to confide in their partner, and have some compassion for that. It isn't because they don't necessarily trust you or love you dearly. It could be that they are absolutely terrified that you'll leave them. It could be that they've told people before and it didn't work out well for them. It could be that they hate themselves and blaming themselves, and when you see this side of them, you're definitely going to be up and leave. So don't assume it's because of a negative in terms of you. Don't take offense that they haven't told you. And a lot of the helplines and support agencies out there will offer advice and support for partners too. So I would encourage you to speak to other people who are in a similar position, other partners, because it can make you feel inadequate. And I think especially when it comes to sex, because you can almost feel like, I feel bad because I want sex and I'm not getting it, and I feel bad because I'm kind of, there's a piece of me that's angry about that.
Right.
And you know what? It's okay to desire your partner and want to have sex with them. Like, this is a good thing. And it's okay to be disappointed that you're not going to be exploring that side of your relationship in the way that you want to right now. That's really okay. I mean, the most important thing at this point is that you can find a way of communicating about this. So that would be what I would advise them to do, to try to communicate, but also to get support for yourself. And to talk to people about how it feels, because often you're neglected. And I think the more you're able to communicate to the partner, actually, the better you can help them too. And they may try to, sometimes survivors of abuse can try to own their experience fully. And in some ways that's absolutely right, because it's their abuse, it's their life, it's their recovery, it is about them, and they need to be able to own it to the extent that it applies to them as an individual. But when it comes down to your relationship with them and your intimate relationship with them, then that is about the two of you as a couple. And so you should be having conversations about that. You should feel included, because that bit is about you as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's brilliant. Yep. And I do want to ask, because you're so right. There's so many even people that have either abused or thought about it, or all sorts on the spectrum. Where can they get help? Where are safe places that they can start talking about this stuff? First of all, reading your book, reading your resources, going to the YouTube channel. Any other things you want to point them to?
Just search online, because there's such a large, so search terms: survivors, sexual abuse, rape, support, help. If you put in those kinds of terms, and maybe if you want something local, then your local area, and you'll find loads. And if you're really struggling, find one of them and phone them up and say, look, can you help me find the thing I'm really looking for? They should help you.
That's right. That's great to hear. And anyone that's working in this space understands the level of privateness and the courage that it takes to come out to ask for support. But at the same time, someone like Dr. Burrowes, where you specifically have an in on the work she's doing. Also, nomore.org, I can point you to. That's, people that really have a pulse on resources and how to move forward in your understanding. And I think, Dr. Burrowes has really pointed out the need to learn, the need to understand this stuff. If any of this is new information to you, and for me, my mind is blown. I'm just amazed at the good work that Dr. Burrowes has been doing. Do check out her resources. And can you go ahead and share some resources that you can point people to? You mentioned your book, but can you give us more clear instructions on how to find you online?
Yeah, if you search for my name, so Nina Burrowes, my surname is Burrowes, and you'll find my websites. NinaBurrowes.com is my website for the public, and my illustrated book for people who've experienced sexual abuse or rape is called The Courage to Be Me. And you can buy a copy of that if you want to, but you can read that whole book online for free. It's all there waiting for you. My book for parents is also on that website. So that's called Eyes Open to Sexual Abuse, What Every Parent Needs to Know. And when you search, my research website might come up, which is nb-research.com. And that's where I've got all of my resources for professionals in this area, specifically law enforcement. But there's loads of videos on there and research reports, and so there's an awful lot of resources online. And you'll also find my YouTube video channel, where I've answered lots and lots of questions about sexual abuse, and look forward to answering your question one day maybe.
Well, Dr. Burrowes, I just cannot be more grateful for how generous you've been with all of your wisdom and insight, and also just how generous you are with giving these resources away for free. I mean, I just want to encourage anyone listening that if you've been moved by what she's doing, again, she is an entrepreneur. This is her business. And so will you just take some time to just write out a check or do a quick online? Is there some kind of donation button that they can push, or how do they get money to you, Dr. Burrowes?
buy my books. Trying to monetize myself by making a living through my books, because then I can be super independent. So please buy a copy.
Well, and stop giving your books away for free, Dr. Burrowes.
That one book, because of the nature of the audience. If you're not ready to phone a helpline, I think you are not ready to go into a bookshop and buy a book.
That's great.
So it's important to me that's there. But I have to say, a lot of people and a lot of organizations are buying it. So it works out.
Good. Well, keep that in mind then. Anyone who is, interested in buying it for their church, or the, people that that need it, would you consider purchasing it? Maybe read it first and then purchase it after that, or something along those lines. That would be very, very helpful. Great. Any last pieces of advice that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I think a lot of people hold a lot of fear and frustration around sexual abuse, and so my message to kind of everyone is, if you want to do something about this, if you want things to change, I think it's about recognizing that the best thing you can do is open your eyes to the reality, to have the courage to do that as well. So a reason why most of my content is there for free is because I want you to educate yourselves. So please, other psychologists are available. There's other information out there, but if you go nowhere else, please check out my website, watch some of the videos, and share them. Put them on Facebook. Let's start having some different conversations about sexual abuse, because what we're doing right now, it's not working, and this issue is too important. It's too important for us, and it's too important for our kids, for us to not have the courage to start having better conversations.
Wow. Again, this is just brilliant. And you can tell the genuineness of Dr. Burrowes. She's just willing to she just wants this to change. She just has seen too many broken lives and too many broken people that it just needs to change. So take the courage, take the courage from what she's sharing and have those hard, difficult, challenging conversations, because that could save someone. Just like you said, the person that's actually been abused doesn't actually get justice in this lifetime. They can't. It's already happened to them, but we can have those conversations, do the hard work, talk to your husband about, difficult things that you're seeing happening, talk to your wife, talk to your kids. I mean, so good. Again, thank you so much for everything you've done. Really, Dr. Burrowes, this is just incredible you've done.
Thank you very much for having me on.
My pleasure. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Wow. It's just so powerful. I mean, I don't know if you could sense, but while I was on the call with her, I'm just awestruck at how many lives this is affecting. It's not a joke. It's not a game. It's something we need to take so seriously. And if you know anyone who could benefit from this kind of material, I ask you to be brave and I ask you to be bold and share it with them. It's just a simple link to share, whether it's on your Facebook page, Twitter, or just a simple email, because people need to know that they are not alone and God sees them and He loves them. And if you, my dear sister, my dear, maybe a husband is listening, I just want you to know that God loves you and He understands that what happened to you was not okay. And He is the one that vindicates. He is the one that holds every tear, every pain point that you have. He carries those. It says He holds them in a bottle. I mean, He cares about your heart and He wants to see you totally, totally free, totally healed and renewed. He loves you and He hates that this happened to you. So please check out the resources. Go to delightyourmarriage.com. There's resources that Nina mentions, and it's all linked up there. But don't let the silence win. It's not okay for you to hide and feel embarrassed and all by yourself when you're not. There's so many out there who want to help you. It's time to reach out. It's time to reach out. I love you. Thank you again for listening. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. If you've been blessed by this, why not share it? Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.